Medicare-funded telehealth is up and running in Australia due to the pandemic. The new system lets patients have remote video and phone consultation with GPs or other health practitioners, and for it to be bulk billed to Medicare. Dr. Asher Frelich is a GP and telehealth expert and joins me now live. Doctor, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.
For having me.
Firstly, in this time of COVID-19, is telehealth now the new normal?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've noticed an enormous surge in telehealth consultations. They're up about 7,000% since the announcement by Scott Morrison 2 weeks ago that telehealth would now be fully bulk billed. It's always had a place, but a very niche place in the Australian healthcare landscape. And now, for obvious reasons, it's absolutely mainstream. We're having a deluge of calls from anxious patients or just patients keen to just get their regular medication. But we're getting a lot of patients who are in self-isolation, whether imposed or self-imposed, that still want to look after their healthcare and still want to access a GP at all times.
Doctor, we will just have to pause this interview just for a moment. We will come back to you. We are now going to take you live to the Attorney General, Christian Porter, who returned to that earlier interview. I am speaking with Dr. Asher Frelich, who's a GP and telehealth expert, about the current rise in telehealth consultations. Doctor, thank you for your patience. You were saying before that you've seen a massive increase in the number of consultations through this method. Can you tell us as well, what are the list of consultation types that are currently funded by Medicare?
Well, right now, Medicare's been very inclusive in terms of enabling access to telehealth through the Medicare system. So we're getting the full gamut of patients from all over Australia using our service, getting a full Medicare rebate with a full gamut of presentations, from sort of your routine sort of presentation, someone requesting, say, an oral contraceptive pill, to someone who's highly anxious about COVID. I mean, I think the message from the government is where you can stay home and access your GP from home, you should be encouraged to do so. And I think this new Medicare regime is certainly promoting that mission.
From your experience, what are most telehealth consults about right now? What seems to be the trends?
Well, we're naturally getting a lot of patients that are calling that are highly anxious about respiratory symptoms that they might have, and they're worried about whether they could potentially be COVID positive. So we either have to reassure them or risk stratify them and send them off for further testing. We're also getting a lot of mental health presentations, and I think that's something that can be missed. That one of the side effects, of course, of isolation, social isolation, is sort of a spike in depression, anxiety, and mental health presentations. And we're noticing a huge surge in mental health-related calls.
From a safety perspective, how are you finding it's helping to protect the health of not only patients, but also yourself and medical professionals?
Well, yeah, it's the GPs that work for our service, for Instant Scripts. They're tremendously grateful. And they're grateful for these MBS, these Medicare items, because it's protecting them, it's shielding them from, having to be physically in touch with many hundreds of patients a week, which would, obviously expose them to risk. The patients are obviously very grateful as well. Most of our patients are understandably very apprehensive about leaving their home, and even more apprehensive about sitting in a GP waiting room.
And how can Australians access telehealth?
So, look, telehealth is available for all members of the college, the FRAC GP College. Instant Scripts is one such service, and we have over 20 Australian registered GPs at Instant Scripts doing fully bulk billed consultations around the clock. And we've got a partnership with over 1,000 pharmacies Australia-wide. So if we issue a prescription, you're simply picking up your medication from your local pharmacy rather than having to go through the GP waiting room. So it's minimising the physical contacts. And I think that was the purpose of creating this, quite generous and all-encompassing the Medicare telehealth program.
Do you think that post the pandemic, I mean, you said earlier that it's always been around, but not many people use it. But do you think post this pandemic that this might just become part of everyday consultations now?
I think it certainly will be, and this is a wake-up call for the Australian government to say we must provide some funding for telehealth going forward, even after this pandemic is behind us. My expectation is that it will be limited to some extent, because at the end of the day, the gold standard in medical care is always a comprehensive physical examination, and that's what's lacking in telehealth. So telehealth certainly has its limitations, and I think the government going forward after this pandemic will provide for telehealth, but not to the same generous degree that it's providing for it now.
Dr. Asher Frelich, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Appreciate the insight.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.